recent is shorter courses, dilution. Right.
Right, I declare the meeting opened. So this is a meeting of the Finance and General Purposes Committee. And although the first item is apologies for absence, I don't think there are any, so you don't have to worry about accepting it. So thank you all for turning out this evening. The second item is declarations of interests. Firstly, are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests? And secondly, any declarations of any other interests in relation to any of the matters on here, which I suspect are primarily in connection with applications. That moves us on to representations from interested parties, and we have a representative from Colonel Road Allotments, Mark, who's going to ask us for some support in finding some extra land into the agenda, but please explain.
Yeah, there's a number of things there. What I'll do is I'll talk about three things. Firstly, who we are, where we came from, and the situation we're in. Secondly, talk about the grant application that we inappropriately put in for coronation funds, which is something completely different. And the third thing then is about the expansion of the society and the fact that we've got a huge waiting list that's actually larger than the number of people on the site at the moment. So, firstly, around 2018, I was contacted by the owner of the field who was then running it. This is Miller's Field, down on Miller's Road, and you're probably all aware of where it is. And do stop me because it's such a small community. I'm talking to that. If you need to talk to me about anything, just raise questions as we go. So, 2018, I was offered a plot, took a plot on. And then the owner started to explain to me some of the issues that he was facing in management side. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And 5 years down the road, what we have now is a site with a fence around it, which I got funding for from the council. We have a bank account, which is looking quite healthy. It's got a couple of £1,000 in it. We've got 20 smallish plots, only about 6 metres by 3 metres. And we have a fairly healthy community. There's one plot that's not being worked at the moment. But the style of my approach, that's what I give into a fair chance. You know, quite often people have family issues or health issues, and there's some kind of reason why not working it. So we're not strict like a lot of societies, like the one my dad's a member of in Oakham, where they're quite fierce about that sort of thing. So we've got a good community, we've got a stable site, a stable bank account, which is gradually increasing over time. And we've now got a big waiting list as well, but I'll come back to that in a bit. A few months ago, one of the plot holders said, oh, there's this coronation grant thing, you should apply for it. And I was rather busy at work, so I didn't stop and read all the small print carefully enough. So I put an application in and then was told very politely that funding fences for allotments or extensions of fences for allotments wasn't really the purpose of the coronation fund. So I'm very thankful that you put the application back in as a sort of general application for allotments. But what we're trying to do there is we're trying to sort of harden the boundaries around the site to try and keep out deer like muntjac and fallow deer, which hop over and then at the leisure work their way through the plots and chew everything to pieces that's not protected very securely. So that's the primary purpose of being here. The secondary purpose is that, as I've said, we've got a waiting list of 17 or 18 families now. When I first took this on, there was about a 50% turnover every year, and the plots were double the size, but we halved the size of the plots because people quite often couldn't handle a full-size plot. And now we've got 20 plot holders who are quite, it's quite stable. We might lose one or two per year, but we're not going to lose masses of them all go. So we have this big waiting list. Now, I did talk to Neil Fraser about this, and I found, because he's got some experience in local community matters, and I said, what should we do about this? I said, well, maybe we should contact the school or large landowners to see if there's any land we could lease on a long-term basis. Typically, allotments work best if they're on 25 or 50-year leases. So he said, go and talk to the council about it. He said, don't go and talk to the school directly. So I'm really here to say, hello, I'm here. we've got this stable allotment society, we'd like to sort of expand onto other sites if we can find any that are suitable. And if you are able to support us with increasing the fence, that'd be great, but if you can't, I understand that, there's a lot of pressure on the money. That's it.
Have you got any possible sites in mind where you might get a bit of space?
There are some fields owned off South Road by the school, one of which I think is where it's next to the Foxtel Village on South Road. That field has some higher up areas and some lower areas. I know they put sometimes Shakespeare plays on there in the summer, but otherwise that's just used for grazing. But it has been set aside, I understand, by the school for community purposes. So portions of that might be suitable. And to be clear about this, this is a matter for negotiation. We don't want to sort of go and impose ourselves on some place, even if the landowner wants it, if the locals around there don't want it. So we need to be clear. Yeah, we can talk about potential sites, but I've not talked to the school about it, it's just something in my head. The playing field that was part of the old middle school is also potential, but that floods quite high up. And also, I think the school are planning to use that more regularly. It is a dog walkers use that. So that's an open field that's available for public use. Allotments on the upper end side of that might work because they'd be hidden from Cobthorpe, so I don't think the school would be objecting. But the question is whether local dog walkers and other users of that field have objections to that. Other than that, I know that the school, Rothschild and Goodnells hold quite large amounts of land around here, and those would be the sorts of people or organisations I would approach. I wouldn't approach large farm, direct tenant farmers or farmer owners because they're of a different mindset. I grew up in rural Yorkshire, I know what farmers' mindsets are, and they don't really like a lot of keepers, and I think it would be a waste of my time approaching people like that. So, yes, I've got two ideas, but I'm open to suggestion. But, I'd like to work collaboratively, to try and move things forward.
Have you spoken to, or do you know about the Flatton Field Association?
Yeah, I've had some involvement with that. Peripherally, more when Christina Court was involved. All of that area was allotments.
Right.
Second World War. I mean, there were lots of sites. My dad grew up here during the Second World War, and there were lots of sites around town that are now built on that were allotments at that time, like 80 years ago. The Fletton Field, including the bit where Abbott House is now, that was all allotments. It was land that was used by the occupants of this building to grow food for themselves, and I think there were some other allotments down Blackhawk Lane as well. There's a housing estate there. At various points, members of the Fletton Field group have suggested that they might have some of that for allotments and some for other uses. I'm open to that. I mean, I think they want to carve off a relatively small portion of it. But, I'm open to discussing that and maybe having half a dozen or something.
Mr. Clark.
In your mind, how much sort of land are you thinking? That much or that much? How much land do you have at the moment in comparison?
So, I can send you a quote, I don't know off the top of my head. The site is probably about 30 metres wide, 40 metres wide, by about 1,200 metres long, and it goes down a hill. So for allotments, it's relatively small. And when I took it on, I looked at the numbers and I figured that anything smaller than that probably wouldn't be viable on its own from a financial point of view. The increase in our funds is marginal, and we're reliant on the charities and the members are giving us things and whatever. So if you're talking about 15, 20 families, say, we haven't even gone out and talked to anybody about this or invited any interest. I think those numbers are double or triple, but if you say 20 plots, and you said 18 metres squared per plot, so it's 360, 3,500 square metres, something like that, probably.
Councillor.
Thank you. You know, of course, as of course we all know, that the school are probably the single largest landowner throughout.
Yeah.
Have you made any direct approach to the estates person yet or not?
I have the name of the lady who is in charge of the estates generally. I was about to make contact with them. I ran it past their phrase and he said, "I'm going to talk to the council first. Don't go to them directly." I'm happy to talk to them directly. What I don't want to do is turn this into an industry because I'm a full-time employed person. I've got elderly parents, and my wife's in the same position, so I don't, at the moment, I'm struggling to keep on top of the workload for the site that we have. Yes, I'm kind of, I can open that door, go down that road, but,
Well, in these circumstances, I think one general method should be go to the top and put your cards on the table.
Yeah.
Whether or not the school will be able to help you will be for them to decide.
Yeah.
Of course, you mentioned plastering wartime, but quite frankly, during those years, things were radically different. We had to dig for victory.
yeah,
In fact, actually, my late mother-in-law, I think, got the sixth form at St. Francis House to plant vegetables on the lawn.
right, yeah, there's lots of that.
And these things had to be done. But now in peacetime, conditions are different.
The land is always a problem in allotments, and the leases is always a problem. It'd be nice to have a situation where we had a reasonable amount of allotments around the town, that, managed by people like myself, with the council. But that's, at the moment, that's kind of several steps away. I think long-term leases are the next stage. We've been promised a long-term lease for Benfield Road allotments, once the planning is approved for the rest of the site, the outline planning. So I tend to agree with you. I mean, I think going to the person at the top is the right approach. So maybe Scott do something like that.
When this council was attempting to put through its own neighbourhood plan, one of the sort of gains that we were trying to look for was extra allotment land. We were also looking for extra cemetery land.
Yeah.
That's a whole cycle on its own. But there are still, of course, people with sites around parts of the town who are doubtless going to look for planning permission, perhaps sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that you may be pushing at an open door for you to say to this council that in looking at planning applications for such sites, we should be saying that as part of any section 106, for example, land could be set aside on the development for an appropriate area for allotment. And if any of these developers were to approach us,
Yeah.
that's something we could potentially take up.
That would be Nirvana for me. I mean, that's what Oakham have done. And what Dad was telling me about, there's been a lot of development around Oakham, arguably too much, but there's been a lot. And all the newer sites that we have got land set aside for allotments.
We'll talk about that in our planning committee shortly. Councillor Wade.
There's also now, I don't know how easy it can be to access, but I know when I walk our dog, it's round at the end of Herne Road, by the, is it Prince William School up there?
Yeah.
If you go down, there's a little alley by Prince William
I know it's
School. There's a whole bunch of land which is not really used for anything other than dog walking. Is that a possibility? Or is that school
So
area?
if I dial one line back, when Neil was more involved in this, I think there was a plan, that land was owned by the builder, there was a plan to put some houses there, and as part of that, they were going to set aside a strip by the main road and have allotments. So that was something that was under consideration at that time.
That site is still possibly going to come forward. And is one of the sites I had in mind, as Sarah said earlier.
Just one thing of declaration of interest. A lot of the land that people think is owned by the school isn't owned by the school, but it's owned by grocers. So going to the top involves going to the court of grocers in London, which is difficult. So that's one thing to just be cautious of. And I'm happy to guide you through people at the school if that's any help. But the other thing is we've been talking in the States about cemetery land and the idea of woodland cemeteries, as we call And I was having a flight of fancy the other day about something like this. And if we had a strip of land that connected, for example, Benfield Road and Creed Road, and it had a bit of woodland cemetery, and it had a bit of allotment, and it had a cycle path that gave us a link from that primary school all the way up Creed Road and down to Benfield Road, then suddenly you've got lots of little things coming together. So there's got to be connection.
Look at our old neighbourhood plan. You'll see that the site to the north of Benfield Road, which would be a very large site, had, amongst other things, a possibility of a festival site, and to talk about woodland cemeteries and all sorts of things. So that was another of the sites that I had in mind. Not that I know whether there's any likelihood of that coming forward in the immediate future. But there are significant tracts of land where there are possibilities. I'm conscious of the fact that it's 48. Have you got one more?
Just one more very, very quickly. This is going to the FGP. Should we also go to full council because there are more people with connections
Um,
than around this table?
It will be minuted obviously here, so it can be talked about as part of any discussion in this meeting, I suppose. I've already said I'll try and make sure it comes up at planning as well. It may be that in some respects this could be planning driven, with the planning committee making recommendations to full council. That's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah.
You're welcome to stay on, but I have to point out that your grant application is the last item on the agenda. I don't think it's a long agenda, but it is the last item.
That's fine, I'll leave you to it. So if you support us, that's great. If you don't, you don't.
Coronation offence would be
Crowns.
Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you. The next item says consideration of requests from interested parties, and I suppose we just had a request from an interested party. But I've already indicated a possible way of taking that forward. So, we'll put that off to planning, I think, in the first instance. The next item on the agenda is the minutes of the last FGP meeting, held on Tuesday, the 11th of April. Present with myself, Councillor Clark, Councillor Reichel, Councillor Arnold, Councillor Hutton, Councillor Wade, Councillor Gray. Those minutes, which are quite brief, have been circulated. Are they approved? So do we have a proposition? Councillor Wade, seconded by Councillor Clark. All in favour? Thank you. That brings us on to financial matters, the first of which is to review the terms of reference of this committee, which is always the first business of the new meeting of the committee in the year. Again, our terms of reference have been circulated. They're reasonably well established, but does anybody have any observations on possible changes that we could make either by way of change or addition?
Two, if I may. One is, it says in the fifth paragraph, there are two verification councillors, of which I'm one, Councillor Hutton is the other. It doesn't give any frequency of those verification meetings. Should there be frequency in there? It says that board propositions will be responsible for reporting to the council, and checks, etc., etc. It doesn't say how often those checks should be carried out. Now, at the moment, I think they're carried out every other month.
Quarterly.
Sorry, quarterly. Is that frequent enough for the council? That's question one.
Right, we thought about that before we get on to question two. Is that frequency issue covered in the financial regulations?
Yeah. and I'm not certain. I don't even know if it's in the standing orders as well.
I mean, if it is covered in our financial regulations, we could always just add, for the sake of clarity, in accordance with the council's financial regulations to the wording.
The reason I mentioned it simply is that I'm guided by council, I'm new to it, but in the year, during the next year, who knows what happens, and we have got no touchstone.
It's a fair point, but I think that's where you'll find that the frequency is set out. But don't ask me what it is without having it in front of me, because I can't remember. Is there a second?
It may have the same answer. It says that in the second bullet, annual budgets recommended precepts for the council, but it doesn't say by when that precept should be set. I assume
I
it's
think,
also the same.
again, it's probably, again, in both, actually, the financial regulations, and I wouldn't mind betting it in the
Standing orders.
Standing orders as well. But again, we could make the same very minor tweak to it, just to make reference to where you will find that. Because it just says in accordance with. Everybody's that bothered, they can look at it.
In practice, it's that's counts anyway, so they set it as a deadline.
I mean, the reality is, you usually have to have it agreed by pretty early in January, which means that ideally we do it in no later than December. There have been occasions over the years, and I think Paul would look back at me, where about the night before the last decision, we've been sat here until God knows when at night, trying to actually thrash it out.
But that's
So
part of why I raised the
it's
question.
not ideal doing it that
Should
way.
it, we know when it should be started.
Yeah, I don't know whether it actually says a date by which we started, but I've got a feeling it may do, because I think October just comes to mind.
We always, yeah, we
In
tend
practice, I
to,
think we
yeah.
tended to do
It
that,
tends to
sometimes
be-
even a bit earlier.
When I joined here, it went along with, in sort of the summer months, July time, the estates committee do their walk around. So then obviously you don't have a meeting in August. September, the estates committee meet and they obviously discuss their walk around. That will then feed into the start of the budget meetings, which we start in around about October.
And that's convenient because it's 6 months way through the year, halfway through.
From those two very sensible points, does everybody else have any observations on the terms of reference? In that case, can I propose that those two very minor tweaks suggested by Councillor Wade
So just basically referring to the financial
refer to the
regs or
appropriate
standing orders.
regulations or standing orders or both. So I propose we make that change.
Seconded.
Seconded by Councillor Rycroft, all those in favour? Yet another unanimous decision this evening. That takes us on to receiving the accounts for May. I think at this point I'm going to hand over to Paul. He's the man with the computer in front of him and the figures, hopefully it's his fingertips.
Well, I
And
can't
actually what we haven't got is a script. I suddenly looked and think what I ought to
I know, we
have
haven't got the cable.
Never mind, you'll just have to talk us through it. And I think people have got, not necessarily going by that. I wasn't envisaging tonight being one of those, let's finish it at midnight. But what do you think we should do?
As far as I'm aware, everything's running quite well. Everyone gets the accounts every month. If there's any queries on anything, then I email everybody back. Jerry and John look at all the payments as well as Ian. Everyone can view it. If there's any queries, they come back to me and people are answered straight away. But if there's any queries, just phone me or call.
I've just got one. The £840 has been paid now.
It has, okay.
No one back to last September, didn't
Yeah.
it?
Is that,
No thanks.
is that one of the ones that we were going to write off?
I think
No,
that was the one we
no.
always knew we'd get.
We always knew we'd
It's a
get
question
it,
of when
yeah.
rather than if.
Yeah, the payment system obviously isn't quite as good as ours.
So, literally the items to receive at night accounts. Does anybody have any questions, observations or anything else? In which case this could be Paul's easiest ride for a while. But thank you for coming anyway. Well, if there isn't anything else on it, we'll move on and look at 2 grant applications. I optimistically said I'm sure we'll be finished by 8:30. Might be rather pessimistic. Well, the first of these applications is from the Anglican Baptist Church Ukraine Wraparound Support Group. There was an earlier exchange of emails going on about whether we invited Karen Gent to attend and whether also we might ask Councillor Harrison to attend. If Councillor Harrison had attended, it would certainly be the second meeting she had had to have attended in Angle this week, which was a meeting with Councillor Clark and myself last night. We did, however, have a presentation relatively recently from the group. We've had pretty good feedback from them as well, and we know what the actual paperwork for the actual request that's gone in. I think one element of it that again featured in some of the toing and froing that went on was around the issue of hire of premises, because one of the things they do is to hire the hub each week, which has a financial cost because we charge to hire it. As a council, we've often made the decision that as a matter of precedent, we don't often waive lease costs. And the most recent decision of that type we took was with the museum, where we said, to a request from them, no, we're not actually going to let you off the lease rent, but were you to put in an application for funding that would enable you to pay the rent, it's likely to be looked on favourably. And I know that sounds a bit mad, but it actually does have the advantage that it shows an income stream from our assets which wouldn't otherwise appear. So I suspect that rather than letting them off the rent, if we feel we should do them at all, we might want to grant fund some or all of that element. They do go a little beyond that. They're actually looking for a total of £3,000, and the £42 a week is only about 500 of that.
How's that work?
So Councillor
How many weeks they use it in the year?
Every Friday.
Every Friday morning.
I think they had one off.
For 52 weeks, £42 a week, isn't £504
No, it isn't. I've just looked at that and thought that can't be right. Even as I said it, I lost confidence. But you're quite right. It doesn't remotely compute at £504 a week for us. And so that wasn't figure.
So 3,000, most of the 3,000 would be spent on, would get back in rent.
Yes, correct.
But we did lower our
Cool.
grant fund. but-
I can't offer it's they have what 2.5 hours, 2 hours.
I don't know why.
Yeah, 2 hours at £14 an hour. From what I
It's just
gather.
£28 rather than 42.
That sounds more like it.
That's per week.
£28
2
a week
hours
will
is
still be over
Three
3,000.
hours.
You said
Is it
that
3
in
hours?
my place, it's actually getting over that figure.
Yes, possibly, yeah. I can't remember whether it's 2 or 3.
Leaving aside for the moment how much they are in practice paying us in the end, what they have done is put in a figure. And they seem to feel that £3,000 would assist them to do what they do. There's no doubt that what they do well. There's no doubt that it's much appreciated amongst the community. It helps. I think it actually given quite a good profile as a nice sort of side spin from it. And we might argue it looks a little bit like the right thing to do. But there has always been another element which I should mention, which is that we've never just gone out to fund charity for the sake of charity, if I can put it that way. In other words, if somebody came along and said to us, look, we think you should donate £1,000 to Oxfam, because Oxfam's a jolly good charity, we would always have said no, because it doesn't fit our funding criteria, so to speak. Potentially, I suppose, if the Oxfam shops in the town had come to us with some sort of a project and sought £1,000, we might take a different view.
The latest invoice is 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening.
Which explains.
So it equates to 56 quid per invoice, times 52 is 2009. If they do it every day, every night, which I don't know.
I wonder whether, I mean, they I don't know if they get funding from elsewhere. They must do.
They get funding for that.
Yeah.
They said in their application to get funding from.
So maybe they get,
What I don't understand, what I don't understand is if I look at the next page, the next attachment, where they spent £3,000 last year, rent and hire premises is minimal. And so where they get, at a rough guess, that's where they get their £504 from. So if they're being billed 2.9 per year, where is that being paid? Because it's not showing.
They're paying, they pay their bills.
Is it David Sander? Is that what it's under?
Right, it's Andrew, Baptist Church.
And Baptist Church.
I just,
So the submission they've got here, income and expenditure transactions by category, there's 2,500 on one page and there's 500 almost on another page. We've got £168 for Alnwick Town Council 3 times. Starter funds for family, we've got all kinds of things, not £3,000 a month. So I'm not quite sure. There seems to be an anomaly there.
Yeah, but looking on these invoices, they're £168 per month, which is just over 2,000.
Yeah. I think they,
Where is it here? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, I've got 5 payments
mm,
in here and a lot of payments elsewhere, so there must be a line already from somewhere else.
I think they're getting, I think
where have you got this?
expenditure,
In
it's the two,
In the email that Emma sent out,
Yeah.
you've got on one page or one attachment, you've got the grant application. On the next attachment, you've got the income expenditure transactions. And the next attachment, you've got more income expenditure transactions. And I can see 6 payments for 160.
it's only an expenditure list, so it's not a income and,
No.
so they're not saying if they're getting any income from anywhere else.
No, I was just gonna say,
They're not showing the expenditure of £2,900.
Yeah.
No,
Confused.
yeah, we're going to be £2,000, not 2,009. So they're £168 per month. I've just gone back through the invoices.
And they're all paid, aren't
The latest 2 are outstanding,
they? But they tend to,
but one of those is 1st of June.
yeah.
This isn't a full year. It says financial year, but this is just July to December. So 6 months, so that does make sense. Okay.
Right, what they're asking for is 3,000. You have the option, I suppose, of granting it to them in full or in part, and we have the option of either giving it to them in one hit or phasing the payments in some way across the year. All are options. I know that sometimes with some of the bigger grants we've given in the past, going years back, we've sometimes decided that it's better to pay them as so much a quarter or something.
Last year you paid 3,000.
Yeah, I think that's what we gave them last year, so I think that's why they think that they
So
need that
come back
again.
and ask them the same thing. So, Mr. John.
I'd say this is an unusual situation because obviously we don't know how long the war in Ukraine is going to go on. I would say what they've done is outstanding for us as a town and a community. I think it's also been really good for us as a council. We've got the hub at the heart of that. And for me personally, while I appreciate everything you've said about the waiving the fees, I think if we said we were hosting them here, that would feel like the right thing to do for us. But either way, I'd like to support Override in some way, shape or form for my mates.
Councillor Manco.
Before I make my point, could I ask Councillor Clark to speak up more clearly? What courses are you recommending?
For my money, I think we as the town council should offer them the hub for as long as they need it, because it's good for us.
And what about the balance of applications, the 2,000 lot?
I was going to say, I think.
Yes or no?
Well, I don't know what number we're talking about, is the answer.
Well, actually, we have Carolyn's own figure in her email, which I copied also to the mayor, dated 9th of June, where Carolyn asks for a waiver of the hub fee plus 2,500. So,
but I suspect that's on the basis that there is.
so in other words, do we give them the 2,500? Yes or no? What say you?
I would say yes, but I'm not sure that those figures are necessarily.
Yeah, subject, of course, to some verification of figures. Subject to.
I think because of the confusion about the rent and it doesn't actually marry with what we charge them, is it better that I go back to Carolyn and explain this? And do you want me to say potentially we would offer them? The only thing I'm saying is if you want to give them 3,000, it's got to go to full council anyway. But the recommendation to full council would be, if you wanted that we give them the hub for free. And does that help?
I think I'll have other meetings, if it's okay.
Right, Councillor Hutton first, Councillor Wade, and then Councillor.
I think you've already explained why we don't like to waive fees for the buildings, and I agree with that. I think we should continue to charge what the appropriate fee is for using the building, but of course there's no reason at all why we can't look to offset that with the grant. And I would also agree with the point that I do think I'm not prepared to support anything at the moment because I don't understand what the proposition is.
I know.
I think Councillor Wade was about to make a very similar point.
Excellent point. I think I've modified what we're going to go back with slightly and say we need a better clarification of what their spending is, i.e. the income expenditure account for the whole year so we can see where it goes. Better clarification of the rent situation because it doesn't marry up with what we're being told by our finance person. And a better understanding of what they want the money for. And I think I would propose we go back and say the council is in favour of support, but not tell them what the kind of support is because they don't want to bind us.
Councillor Arkell, would you be happy with that approach? Because it seems to me that there is a definite case for getting some clarification here. And in hindsight, it would be much better if Carolyn had been here to this. As she isn't, and as we've got a meeting literally next week, if she's contactable, we may have this information next week. And if the amount of the grant potentially to be awarded is this high, the decision that Emma says has got to be a full council decision anyway. So deferring this item to next week seems to make sense, and even more sense if we can get the clarification that Councillor Wade's asking about. I'm done for that.
Yeah, well, I can drop her an email, but I shall see her on Friday anyway because I'll be here. So what I can do is put it on the agenda, and hopefully I should have something.
Councillor Arkell, do you happy with that?
Yes, just to make sure I've understood properly. We're minded to be helpful, subject to clarifications, which our colleague here spelled out admirably. So I would certainly support Emma going back to Carolyn by email and following up by word of mouth and tidying up loose ends. I think you mentioned you were seeing her in any case on Friday.
Yeah.
Yes, that I fully support.
Right. All those in favour of that approach? Those against? Councillor Arnold is, I think,
Abstaining.
Probably so confused by now that that's maybe the only decision he feels able to take. Councillor Clark.
Can I say for the record that there is a long list in one of those zip files that you just find out to us of all the income and expenditure, including all our grants and all the donations they've got with an income totaling £10,047. So it's in the second zip file. So the information is there.
Let's all have another proper look at that between now and next week. And those figures need to be available to the full council for next week. I must admit, I slightly balked when I started reading it and thought I won't bother to print it all off. Right, we'll come back to that next week. That leaves just one application, and that's the application Mr. Gent, different Mr. Gent.
When we came in.
All our applications today come from people called Gent, but it's not that. Mr. Gent, this time of the Benfield Road Allotments Group, and their application is for some £2,000 towards a £3,300 project to improve fencing, essentially to try and keep the monk-out deer out of their allotments because of the devastation that you described. They're perfectly capable of reaping on there. It's obviously quite a large amount of money for what is quite a small group of people. And that sort of was the instant thought that I had about it in terms of its impact on the wider community. I think it is sadly rather relatively limited. We can see that, frankly, the income and expenditure is broadly in line, and though they've got a couple of thousand in the bank, that's not sufficient to fund their project. Perhaps to say my initial reaction is slightly wary about this. I almost feel that our efforts might be better placed in supporting them in due course with trying to help them get other allotment land and maybe help get that a bit set up. That's not the application before us, that's something perhaps for the day. Councillor Hutton first.
I was just going to say that I agree with the view you've expressed. It's quite small. It's less than 20, wasn't it? I think 17, was it? We were told.
I think he said there were 20 plots of which one is not being used, but I think is effectively paid for.
So
It's
it's,
about 17 or 18 on the waiting list.
it's
I mean, even if you took everybody, it's about 40 people, which is a percentage of our population, relative to, say, the soccer club or the rugby club or whatever. It's very small.
yeah, so maybe we could offer an amount which would be made available if they were able to raise the funding from other sources for the project to go ahead.
There's some sort of match funding.
Well, some sort of a promise that we will contribute, say, for the sake of argument, £500 if they are able to raise the funds they need to go ahead with it.
Give them an incentive.
That's a proposition.
Can be, yeah, I can propose that if that helps.
So
Does anybody want to? It's been seconded. If anybody has anything else to say beforehand, I'll allow it until we actually take a vote on
So what was that,
Just-
£500?
it. We're just going to take a vote then on the proposition that we will provide £500 towards the project if they are able to raise the other funds, get that project off the ground. So it's not just handing over the
No,
500,
well,
it's a contribution of 500 towards the finished cost, so to speak. Proposed by Councillor Hutton, seconded by Councillor Rycold. All those in favour of that? 5, 6, everybody. So that's that one done, which leaves only any other matters or report. Councillor Pratt? Nothing from me. Councillor Hyson?
No,
Councillor Ward?
No.
Or Emma?
No.
In which case, at not even quite 7:15, I declare the meeting closed.
Set the precedent now.